I was an astrologer when I went to Africa in 1971. I was romantic and free and a 60s person, and I was tormented in a particular way. And I decided that if I met a witch doctor, they'd help me. I was working for a group of psychiatrists at MIT, and somebody must have said, well, you're traveling, why don't you go to Africa and meet the witch doctor? I don't know how it happened. I think because we thought they were the psychiatrists of Africa. And then I decided, yes, and all this kind of mental torment I go through, maybe they'll help me. And I thought it was a good reason to go, and I went. And I ended up in a small museum by chance and grace in Johannesburg, meeting someone who said, I didn't tell him any of this, I was just riveted by everything that was happening. And he said, so the museum was called the Museum of Man and Science. It was one of the moving forces in it, one of the inspirations was Raymond Dart, paleontologist, discoverer of the missing link, etc. 2 pictures of him, he was fabulous. And the field officer of the museum was Adrian Boucher. It's a harsh picture, but I'll show you lighter ones later. It's just such a good picture. And he was a protege of Dart, and he had been going out in the field a lot for him. And he was also epileptic, and he was unbelievably brilliant at nature as well, and he has a whole story too. And he and this man, he was very involved with the witch doctors for many reasons. And one of the people he was involved with most was called Credo Mutwa. Now, when I looked the other day, he's actually on Wikipedia. Credo is on Wikipedia, and he's still alive. And of all the people you see here, except for me and Credo, everyone else is dead. People die easy there. That's him, but I'll tell you about that later. And so Credo and he decided that they had to, because Adrian had such access to the witch doctors, and through his epilepsy, and also he spoke, and they said he was a Sangoma. And he was like a field officer, in the bush, spending more time with Africans than whites, more comfortable with Africans. And Credo and he decided that they would gather and get as much of the witch doctor lore as they possibly could, because the museum was there, and why not? And it was being lost. And Credo lived in Soweto, and he was very disturbed. He was very disturbed by the young witch doctors who were coming back from training and getting lost, drinking, screwing around, because they didn't have the context, the village context. When they got trained, they came back, and they were always outsiders, but they were valuable outsiders and honored. And in Soweto, it was a bit mad and getting confused. And so he said, it's going to get lost, so write it down. And he said, we need a woman. So Adrian said, well, ask the spirits and bring a woman to the museum. And I arrived. And Adrian said to me, we have to wait for Credo to come in. And if he sees in you what I see in you, then we're off, and we'll get a grant from somewhere. And about 6 weeks later, 7, I don't know, Credo came and went. Credo came in, and Adrian said, bring tea. So I brought tea. And I walked out, and Credo said, where'd you get her? And he said, she walked in. He said, let's find out if she's got what I think. And then he brought a young Sangoma to the museum named Intlaleni. Oh, sorry, there's Credo now. I just took him off Wikipedia. Anyway, he brought in Intlaleni. And Intlaleni was a brilliant young Sangoma that had been sent to him from her teacher. And she was getting into trouble. She was an Aries. And she was very wild. And she was getting into all sorts of trouble, said Credo. And he said, if she and her get on, we've got it. And then we can start getting the woman's lore, collecting all the woman's stuff, so that won't get lost. And then she brought in her aunt, Dorcas, who ended up, Intlaleni and I exchanged hugely for 7 years. And I wrote everything down, and just the other day I found it in my attic, and I didn't know I still had it. It's 500 pages of typed notes of everything that happened every day for years and years and years. And she brought in Lina, her Intlaleni's other aunt. I once said, you have so many aunts. She said, oh, it's just what we call each other. And she had hair down to here. And I learned a great deal from her as well, personally. These two women, I was doing charts to pay for the work that I was doing at the museum. And what they think they taught me was things like how to be a good practitioner rather than how to be an astrologer. My spirit was completely different. Nobody ever tried to train me. Nobody told me I was a Sangoma. They said my spirits were the stars, and they had a name, Child of the Stars. But we would sit for hours and hours, and I would say, what do you do when a woman does this? What do you do when a man comes to you and this happens? What do you do when she's having... So I would ask them how to deal with the kind of clients that they got, and I was getting. So I'll say more about that as I go on. I want to talk about the calling and relate it to a little bit to the calling, perhaps, of an astrologer, or at least certainly this astrologer. All of these people, Elizabeth was a nurse for 7 years when the call came. Lena only had 3 weeks of calling, but it was horrible. And the calling is that you get ill, and you get iller and iller and iller, and then you start having dreams, and you start going crazy. And the dreams at some point either drive you crazy, kill you, or an ancestor comes and says, go and find a teacher. And if you do, then you're okay. And sometimes the teacher you find is nasty and mean and horrible, but they still train you. And sometimes the teacher is wonderful. Dorcas' father was a Methodist minister, and she found it almost, and Credo had a similar thing, Methodist minister, traditional wife. And both of them had a great deal of trouble because of the two. Dorcas continually was sad that she had to be a witch doctor, and she was a great teacher. Even though she was in Soweto, people came from all over. And she said, let's see if I can find it. There she is. She said, I'm going to do Intlaleni because hers is quicker. Intlaleni was out a bit wild, going through a lot of things, and started to get ill. And over a period of years, she got iller and iller and iller until the last year she couldn't work at all. She said, I could not work. My hands were so painful. I could hardly lift anything from the floor. My knees were loose. There wasn't a place on me that was placid. My head was always aching. The eyes were also sore. I could not wash. My body was bent over. Every part of me was sore. I went to the white doctors. They could not tell me what was wrong with me. I even went to the Bantu medical doctors. They could do nothing for me. They gave me a lot of muti medicine, but the muti did nothing for me. Did you tell them what the trouble was? I said. I could not tell them. I could not tell them because even I myself did not know what was wrong with me. How long did this go on? It went on many years, not 1 year, but many years. There came a time when I sat down and I was unable to do anything. I sat down until a year was nearly ended, and in the end I could not work at all. She was employed as a domestic servant. Were you having dreams at this time, during the Great Sickness? They call it the Great Sickness. Yes, there were many. What did you dream about? I used to dream about beads, such as the ones I'm wearing now. I used to dream about the cloth that I'm now sleeping on. Did you never even buy these things? I did not buy them. I just dreamt. And then one day, her grandfather came and said, you must get trained. And her grandfather told her where to go. And it was in the bush. And you'll see the teacher she went to just now. And she stayed with her for, I think, 2 or 3 years. And her training was typical of training. And this is what happens. And I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures that sort of just of them dancing as we go along. But just let me tell you, each of them had a similar story. So the illness, the disturbance, the getting madder, the dreams, and then the demand. Lena's grandfather said, you go now and find a teacher or I kill you. You're dead tomorrow. And I saw people die who didn't go for training. And so she went, and her story is typical, it's just in the office, her story is typical of what happened. She got there in the night, and this woman heard her coming, and as Intlaleni knocked on the door, a drum started beating. And Intlaleni walked in, and her teacher said, you've come. And her teacher was wonderful. And she spent 3 years. And the things that happen is that the teacher takes the wild mind, because the spirit is moving amongst the ancestors in dimensions that are terrifying. Any of you who have ever astral traveled without wanting to, into those dimensions of terror where spirits are moving. And what the teacher does is get the child, the twasa, healthy again. Brings them by good food, by good rituals, by sanity, by care and attention, and slowly the person starts coming back to a little bit of sanity. And then the teacher starts teaching the twasa how to listen to the dreams. So they wake them up every few hours, all night, saying, "What are you dreaming? What are you dreaming? What are you dreaming?" And they just listen and listen and listen until the twasa knows how to wake herself up. And she wakes herself up and listens. And over time, they learn. And Dorcas was really good at this, because she said there are 3 levels of dreams, as far as I remember. And one is the ordinary day-to-day stuff processing. And other is prophecy. And a third is about the patients that's going to be coming to see you and what they might need. The twasas are held and led by their own talents. So some are good at herbs, and so the teacher will send them to a herbalist. And some are good at dreaming, so the teacher will send them to somebody, or themselves teach them how to dream more wisely. And some throw the bones. That's Intlaleni's teacher, the one in the middle. Can you see that clearly? Yeah. That's what the twasas look like. They all look absolutely tormented. Because they're still disturbed. And they're still being held and contained by their teachers. And they're all taught to divine. There's Intlaleni with one of her twasas, who turned out to be very, very powerful. And they're all taught to divine. And this is the training. One of the things they're taught is when you go into a house where there are twasas, the twasa, you're told, as a visitor, hide something. And then the twasa is called, and the twasa has to find out what you've hidden. And it's basically a guessing game. Is it bigger than a refrigerator? Is it smaller than a flea? Is it in the back of the house? Is it outside? Is it living in... And each time they ask that, you say, "Siavuma." I hear you. And you say it louder or softer depending on how close they are. So if it really is bigger than a fridge, you say, "Siavuma." And if they say, "Is it behind the house?" and it's not, you say, "Siavuma." And eventually they start listening better and better. And the better they get, the harder it gets, and the clues get less. And eventually, when they finally can divine without any clues at all, their spirits come and tell them that they're ready to kill the cow, or the goat, depending. And at the ceremony, before the ceremony, in the morning they get up, and the teacher has hidden something, and they have to find it. That's the last thing. And Intlaleni's teacher hid the rising sun. That's how good she was. She hid, and another time she hid for her an airplane that had gone over before Intlaleni got up. She hid it in her mind. And Intlaleni could find it. She was very, very good. This is why Credo was so worried about her, because she was so sensitive and so wild, and he wanted her to be safe. And so there's constant divining, and there are constant ceremonies all the time. And the twasas are part of them, but they're always slightly back. And once they're initiated, once they go through the initiation, they're then really part of it. And these gatherings come together constantly. And so we were constantly at gatherings. Bones being thrown on the side, divination going on, trance continually. The bones are collected after you've been initiated. You have to travel the 4 corners of the world, if you're a bone diviner, and on your travels you find bones. They're all called bones. And each one has a specific meaning. And everybody can sort of read each other's bones, but each person has their own way of reading as well. And most of the Sangomas I worked with didn't read bones. Credo did. And he got me to stay. He got me to tear up my ticket because of how well he read my bones. And that's Intlaleni dancing. She was so young when we started, and that's her teacher behind her. That's her teacher. She said her teacher was so she didn't use the word primitive, but she said when she met her, when the husband of the teacher had met her, she wore skins only. But she'd become very sophisticated, because she was dealing with Soweto women who were coming to her way in the bush for training. Oh yes, just in case you think I wasn't really there, I found this and I had to put it in. And I thought, she was so young, Both she and Ntlaleni were so young. I found it amongst all the pictures. So the calling, take it off because it embarrasses me slightly. So the calling is illness and dreams and finding a teacher. And the training is getting the open psyche to close like an aperture, so that it can be, so that when it is needed by somebody who needs some sort of help or healing, there are ways of aiming it or opening it to the spirits who will then, to the ancestors. It's not ancestor worship, they don't worship the ancestors, they worship God. As Dorcas said, we all worship the same God. It's just that we connect with God through our ancestors. And so the aperture closes, and I have to tell you that was so valuable to me. First of all, I don't know anyone who's become an astrologer with that kind of violence. We sort of think, I think I'll become an astrologer, having no idea what it means. But what I learned from them was that the rituals I did to do a chart, and they're very personal, very, very private and very personal, were part of the way of opening the aperture. Well, I call it sacred space, and that's what I teach. I say to my students, you're stepping into, once your client sits down or comes in the house, you're creating sacred space. And in that space, you will know much more than you know normally. You'll be much wiser. And once they leave, the sacred space is closed, and you're just as stupid and just a schmuck like everybody else. And I learned that, I think, from them. I think Dorcas taught me that, because they were constantly saying, I would ask them questions, and they would laugh and say, you're so young, I'd say, I want to serve the world with my stars, and I want to make everyone understand what astrology is, and they'd go, oh, duh, oh, you're so young. And now I say that to my students, and they say the same thing. But it was the thing about when you're in the space, and that's what the teacher teaches, how to create the space and how to maintain it. Because a witch doctor cannot function unless he or she has ritual that goes and goes and goes. Their lives are very circumscribed through ritual. Because if they lose the ritual, they're so overwrought and sensitive that they'll go wild again. So they have a lot of things that they have to do every single day. And now, so the practice has, there's Credo again. So this is something I talk about the astrological community a lot, because I came from Africa looking for an astrological community. I figured there must be one in London. There must be other astrologers. I was the only astrologer there, and I was longing for it. And eventually I found it, what I call the astrological community. And what I learned from them, and I suppose I came looking for it because I lived with them, is that this coming together we do is very important. That's what I was saying to you, Patrick. It's very important because because when we come together, we all interact and support each other and argue with each other and see each other and da-da-da-da. And they did the same. The thing that they did that we don't is that they danced and they killed a cow. Nobody came together where a beast wasn't killed, depending on how powerful the witch doctor was. This was for Adrian. And the beast was huge. It was a bull, because it was a very powerful ceremony, because he was very ill. And he survived and lasted another 2 years, and then he died. And he didn't, they kept saying, you've got to go through the next initiation. And he was bridging the white and the black world. It was hard, and he was afraid to go through the last initiation. And he died. And so if I'm in that mind, the witch doctors said he went back and he died in water. And they said he went back to the Great Sea, because he couldn't go the last step, because it would have taken him too far away from the white world, and from his world, I don't know how to explain it. So what happens at every ceremony is the main thing is dancing, and you dance from sunset to sunrise all night, and the drum goes all the time. And the dancing brings on the trance, and everybody talks everybody talks to their ancestors and helps each other. So they're all night doing it. And that's Dorcas. And that's Robert Shabalala. He was very good looking, and he said something incredible once to me. I said, I'm really worried because Adrian's in there with that man, and that witch doctor hates him. He's his enemy. And he said to me, Da, it's very good to have enemies. Very good. Radinoka is very powerful because he has white enemies and black enemies. But the secret of having enemies is that you never do anything to harm them, ever. And your power is massive then. And he's safe with him because he won't do anything to harm him. That's good, isn't it? So I learned one thing really strong from Robert Shabalala. He's still alive, actually. I heard he was still alive. She was a Scorpio, and that's the only thing I knew about Edith, and she was rather scary. And she used to always tell me sex potions. No, Da, when they come to you and they're worried about their husbands, or when men come to you and they're worried about, she would tell me another sex potion. Robert Shabalala. And so what would happen, now I wanted to show you this because what happened, this is Madlanini and this is Grace, and I've written about it, but I haven't got time now. And her head was going so fast. Can you see how fast her head is going by her hair? This is Grace, this one. She's in trance, and her head is moving so fast. I thought it would fall off. And she got into such a trance, she couldn't get out. And she was talking for the whole community at that point. And she stayed in trance for a very long time. And at some point, they called Dorcas, because Dorcas was the one that could pull her out of trance. And I went to her village once, and very late at night, I was the only, I don't know why I was the only one in the hut, and she went on and on and on. And at the end of it, it went very quiet. About 4 a.m, it went very, very quiet, and everybody was, because she was just reading for everyone, reading and reading. And at some point, she looked up and she said, Da? And I said, yes. And she said, you see why I want die. And I went across the room and sat by her and I said, I see why you want die. To be a Sangoma, to be a witch doctor, was not something anyone wanted. They fought it with all their worth. And the ones that fought it most were the best. But the ones that fought it completely died. So you had to fight it all the way to the edge and then give in. And then the ancestors that came to you were very, very powerful. And the fun and the joy of the dancing and the being together. Credo once said to us, he said, you are valuable to us once, when he was doing his talking, He said, we in Soweto are losing our traditions. And because of this museum, because you center a place for us, we can all come and stay in touch with our own traditions. And therefore, you think we are giving you something. You are also giving us something. And I don't know, I think there are other people doing that now. In South Africa, I hear rumors, occasionally. And I think there are other people setting up schools that are valuable as well. But for the coming together, they fought with each other. I mean, Intlani got so angry at Lena once, she broke her finger. And they both came to the museum to give me information. Lena with a huge thing on, and I said, what did she? She said she broke my finger, and Intlani went, huh. And Lena said, she's a very bad niece, very bad. And then they just carried on. So they had, you think we have arguments. We don't like each other much. The sort of dislike and enmity and coming together and falling apart and coming back, and then the dancing. And in the dancing, everybody came together. Nobody wouldn't dance. Nobody wouldn't go into the spirit for the community when they came together. And so it was very important, these gatherings, somehow. Darby. Yes, I can see. 3 minutes. No, I'm a time freak. I would, yeah. Okay. I wanted to show you a smiley or picture of him. And that's. So is there anything else I want to say? So I would say, I think what I want to say, so I was talking so fast I hardly heard myself, but I think what I wanted to say is that I think we're called as astrologers too. I think lots of people are called. I'm not just astrologers. Some of you in the room are not astrologers, but if you're vocated, you're definitely vocated, called to it. And the calling to it, you need something to support it, whatever it is. You need support for it. And I suppose it's a Capricorn thing. I'm sort of into recognizing community as a place of supporting, whatever is the vocation and the calling. As astrologers, we are outsiders. People are trying to become insiders and, doing all this stuff and everything, but we're outsiders. And we're outsiders because we're doing something that goes directly, that operates with a different intelligence, a different kind of intelligence. And we have to stay outsiders, otherwise we lose our ability to hear whatever it is we're listening to. And yet we come into the inside, and we serve it, and through having children and marrying and living in communities, we also partake on the insider thing, and that's what they were struggling with, particularly in Soweto. How to be inside, how to continually come together to remember what they were, and then go back into Soweto and just be part of this secular world somehow. They missed the ones who came from Christian backgrounds and who were called out of it, really suffered because the church community was so good and so strong and they were so safe there. Whereas witch doctors, it was very dubious somehow. But they somehow, when I came up here to the northern hemisphere, I do charts by saying everything I see first. I never ask questions. They used to say, why do white doctors have to ask you questions? Shouldn't they know what's wrong with you? And so that's how I teach my students. Know first, tell first. If you get it wrong, so you get better as you go on. Chances are you'll get better as you go on. And so, but the main thing was to do with how to create sacred space and to recognize it and to have a life that honored this sacred space in the middle. That was what you were here for, this sacred space where you access something else for the service of others. So, I'll stop.